You've provided a wonderful overview of Roman Catholic mission work, but I'd like to be able to identify some personalities in the history. Who are the great figures in early Catholic missions? Are there any models among the missionaries whom you would have us recognize and perhaps emulate in any way?
Thanks for the question, David. We've already mentioned, of course, Francis of Assisi and Raymond Lull, who worked trying to reach out to Muslims through argument and reason. We've mentioned Ignatius of Loyola and the Jesuit order that he organized. In addition to them, we should take note of several others, especially early Jesuit missionaries. One of the inner circle of friends and companions of Ignatius of Loyola was named Francis Xavier. He began as a follower of Ignatius and committed himself to mission work. And already in the 1540s, Xavier went out as a Jesuit missionary to India, initially making contact with the Portuguese colonies there, but then very quickly moving beyond the colony into unreached areas of India and working with people of lower caste there. For the last decade of his life, he worked on the southern part of India. Then he moved to Malaysia for a short time and on into Japan, where he had the opportunity to gain access into a very difficult country. The actual fruits and success of his labors were not very notable. He didn't have a lot of converts in Malaysia or in Japan. But he began to show what was possible for European missionaries who were really committed to this task and were willing to risk going beyond the sphere of influence of European powers. Because remember, although there was an enclave of Portuguese control on the coast of India, Francis went beyond that sphere of influence where he could count on the protection of European governments, and intentionally went to places where he was preaching the gospel from a position of weakness. And it's that humility, that courage, that willingness to sacrifice that's really admirable in the work of Francis Xavier. Another Jesuit from the next century, Matthew Ricci, actually gained access into mainland China. He patiently and slowly learned the Chinese language and Chinese customs and presented himself as a scholar, and especially a religious scholar, but he was willing to make himself useful to the Chinese in whatever way seemed to give him the greatest opportunity. He eventually made his way to the capital city, where at the invitation of the emperor, he even came into the Chinese court. It's a little bit amusing that one of the first entrees he had into the inner circle of the Chinese upper class had nothing to do with religion or theology. He had brought with him 2 mechanical clocks as a gift to the emperor, which were very well received. All emperors like gifts, I guess. But the Chinese had no idea how to wind the clocks up when they ran down. And Matthew Ricci gained something of a reputation as a intellectual and scholar because he knew how to wind the clocks. So his initial entree was at a very different level than as a messenger of the gospel. Nevertheless, that brought him into meaningful conversation. So he was intentionally engaging the Chinese upper class by adapting locally acceptable ways of communicating and relating to each other. And that gave him opportunities for sharing the message of the gospel as well. In India, a Jesuit by the name of Robert de Nobili followed somewhat of the same tactics. He noticed that while Christianity had some success among lower caste people in India, there was very little openness among upper caste or the high class people or the ruling classes in India. Robert de Nobile made a careful study of Indian society and language and decided that he would adopt the manner of dress and the style of teaching of an Indian guru. This was very controversial with other Christians of the time, and in fact, his decision to identify himself as a Christian guru led to him being cut off, basically, from contact with the established Roman Catholic Church for much of his time. In this role as a Christian guru, he made a careful study of Indian language and literature, became really the first scholar to master the Tamil language and to study its extensive literature. And on the basis of that study, which was the acceptable way for an Indian religious teacher to operate, he began sharing the message of the gospel with Indians in a very different social sphere. So Robert de Nobile was an example of how adaptation to the cultural expectations of a people can gain a hearing for the gospel. I might also mention one figure from the Americas while I'm taking this survey of early Roman Catholic mission leaders. Bartholomew de las Casas had gone to the Americas, specifically to the island of Hispaniola, as a young gentleman, where he acquired a plantation and numerous slaves and set about trying to make his fortune. But at about age 30, de las Casas underwent a profound experience which changed his life and changed the whole course of his career. And he entered the priesthood and became a champion for the indigenous people, and was highly critical of the treatment that the Indian inhabitants of the Americas were being given at the hands of their Spanish rulers. Became an important figure who worked not only for their conversion, but also for the humane treatment of the American Indians under Spanish rule. Bartholomew de las Casas is an important figure who connected not just the role of conversion, but also connected that with the need to address the social and economic conditions of the people that he served. That's been a tradition then since that time with Roman Catholic missions, and indeed with Christian missions generally. So those four figures, I think, are ones that you'll want to keep in mind. Francis Xavier, Matthew Ricci, Robert de Nobile, and Bartholomew de las Casas. All worked in different parts of the world. They faced slightly different conditions. Their techniques were not exactly the same, but each of them made an important and lasting impact, not only locally where they served, but more generally in the way the Christian church thinks about its mission.